There we go.
Oh.
So, Assalamu alaikum. That means peace be upon you. My name is Ahmed Shahid, and I'm an assistant imam at Masjid Warthadean Muhammad and Mercy Community Center here in Houston. And I am the host for today's weekly Faith 101, where we're chatting with leaders of different faith backgrounds. This is part of Minaret Foundation's multi-faith programming, and through this, we hope you learn a little bit more about our neighbors. And today I am blessed to be here with Reverend Dr. Duane Larson of Christ the King Evangelical Lutheran Church.
Wonderful to be with you, Ahmed. And my thanks to the Minaret Foundation for inviting me into this very fine series.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, Reverend Dr. Lawson, so how would you prefer to be?
Duane is fine. Yeah, you can call me Duane. That's fine. I have a Southern California, very informal background. Though I've not been there for decades, I still live with that genealogy.
Not a problem at all. All right. So, Duane, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, great. Thank you. As I just alluded, I am born and bred native Californian from a long time ago now. Born in San Diego, California. Grew up there, later in a Lutheran church, spent most of my time on waves, surfing, and at a place that came to be quite true, faithfully known as Ridgemont High in a famous movie, although the high school was actually Claremont High School. I went on from there to college in the Pacific Northwest, seminary, Upper Midwest, served three congregations in California before I went on for doctoral work at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And since about 1993, I taught as a seminary professor out in Gettysburg, PA, and then a seminary professor and president of a seminary in Iowa, and then back of all places down here in what was to have been a temporary interim position, but ended up being called as the senior pastor here at Christ the King Church. And it's been absolutely lovely, vigorous time. Though, I've come to learn that Houstonians live about 10 and a half months out of the year for these particular 6 weeks that are to come. It's all worth it. It's wonderful right now to be with you all. And I love the cosmopolitan atmosphere and the great interreligiosity of Houston.
I'm glad to hear it. So I've been in Houston a long time now, since '95.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
what was the transition like coming from California, so many places up north, to Texas and the Republic?
Well, a lot of it was a little bit of comedy because, as soon as the temperature would hit 70, I'd hear complaints of being too cold here. I've lived through all the thick of freeze and frost and sub-zero, and in some ways I would prefer a little bit of that over the high heat and humidity, but more so to the point, what I've come to discover here in Houston is that I think this is one of the most respectful, religiously pluralistic communities that I've ever known. And I'd claim that as probably the best religious climate for mutual understanding and affirmation that I found throughout the whole United States, bar none. I think we've got the best atmosphere intellectually, spiritually, in terms of our concerns, all of our faiths together for civil rights. So it's met my passion deeply, and has all the more inspired me in my seasoned age just to be all the more active about what our respective faiths advocate for. So I've been happy about the transition. It's been the busiest time I've experienced in my professional life, even busier than being on the road as a seminary president. But this is the kind of busyness that gives one a great sense of satisfaction, of meaning. We're here, you and I and everyone participating in this showing, we're here for the ultimate causes, and I rally to that.
I completely agree. Seeing Dr. Kleinberg's presentations on the Houston being the way the rest of the nation is going and being majority minority and the diversity that is inherent to Houston, and
Yeah.
couldn't agree more.
Yep.
And so, getting back to our program, so what does service, and especially you just talked a little bit about it in terms of civil rights and some of the things that you've had the opportunity uh, to do now that you're in a stationary position. So, what does
Yeah.
service mean in your faith tradition?
Yeah. Well, it is as amplified as can possibly be under what we all know is the golden rule. You know, do for others what you would have them do for you. Um, in our own tradition, the Christian language, of course, like the Abrahamic religions like Islam and Judaism, it's love the neighbor. Um, and services means to put all of our skills to that end. I've spent a lot of my life doing that in terms of teaching, of course, in terms of writing and speaking. That's still probably the way in which I do it the most. But each of us, we believe, are appointed and gifted to serve in ways that we have peculiar, unique ways to do and necessary. We're all, in that respect, call it even a chaos sometimes of complementarity. Everybody's skills and insights are necessary. To what purpose? To love the neighbor. Uh, and we put it theologically even in this manner that God has secured us for God's self. So this will get into other questions later, I know. But because God has secured us for God's self, we're not to worry about our relationship with God. We're now to live in the freedom, which is not the freedom to do anything we want, but the freedom to serve the neighbor in fullness. So, from our tradition, as with the slogan of our particular denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, we say it's God's work, our hands, our minds, our eyes, our heart, of course, everything else. But we can be all the more active about that. We need to be because we Lutherans come from a all too normative white Western European background, had not had a good history about being active in the civil realm. And we're, I think, working hard to redeem that part of our history. So to just take all the more seriously in even in as inclusive and progressive a fashion as possible to do what needs to be done. Feed the neighbor with IMGH, care for the pets as well, but to go out to what society is called the margins and advocate for justice in every possible way. We can do that without being partisan. We think we need each other's diversity to do that in ways that are holistic, that will cover for everybody, from helping them help themselves, but to help those who've been abused by the normative systems that have generated, of course, over centuries.
Excellent. And I know I personally volunteered with, I believe the term Thrivent. I
Oh,
think
have
that,
you?
yeah,
Good.
during Habitat for Humanity. So,
Great.
yeah, it
Oh,
was a very rewarding experience where, and I think that's um, so I guess my question is, and I don't know if they are evangelical Lutheran, if they would be under the same. Uh,
what a timely question. There's a story here that I'll have to keep very compact. I preached about that issue just this last Sunday. Anyone who wants to go to YouTube and look up Christ the King Lutheran Church Houston can catch that sermon. I was interviewed by a secular Asian journalist. I won't go into more detail. Who's purely secular and came to me because we had the word evangelical in our name formally, and they wondered what I and we were about in supporting the present political administration.
right.
And I was dumbfounded. You know, the word evangelical means good news. It was, it's from the New Testament, and it came into our name from our founder 503 years ago on 1517 Halloween. October 31, when Martin Luther started the whole Reformation by posting some debate theses and mailing the elector of Saxony about these debate theses, these things he wanted to put out there with that medieval Catholic audience. He did not want the church to be named Lutheran. He wanted it to be named the Evangelical Movement, because we're about good news. What's the good news? God's got my back, so now I can have yours. And the whole point was God doesn't need our service, our neighbor does. We're freed from self-absorption and self-concern, so to care for the neighbor. And so Thrivent's got it right when they'll help sponsor fundraising to build a habitat place. And we have this all over. Perhaps actually the best ways that we get about that, effectively speaking, are like with Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, along with the Worldwide Islamic Agency that is about refugee work. Ours and Catholic Refugee Services are up there at the 3 top agencies globally, as well as in this country. Shows who we are about. But evangelical is not supposed to be a political term. And for all, I'll just put it out there, evangelical in a certain way has been turned inside out, meaning opposite what Martin Luther wanted it to mean. So we've got a lot of work in teaching in that way ourselves too. Even though we're kind of a smallish movement in the United States, there are 6 million of us Lutherans in the United States. We've got about 70 million overall around the world, which makes us a pretty sizable movement, especially in the 2/3 world.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation. That is very timely indeed. And it was something I had a question about, so I appreciate that succinct. Definitely.
Glad to share.
What does, I'm partially familiar with Martin Luther and his philosophy, but what does prayer look like in
it is personal. People have their private ways of praying, and we try to teach that. It is corporate, that is communal. We have ways of praying liturgically, contemplatively in our tradition. It's probably, I would be honest, still a large teaching task for us to help people to pray personally in their way with discipline. I know that the prophet, blessed be his name, had taught that the Islamic community needed to learn to pray in certain manners several times a day. Right?
Yes.
And it was a matter of obedience. In our tradition, because there was so much 500 plus years ago, so much what Luther discerned as oppression of the personal conscience. People were free then to be a bit more subjective about themselves, and we probably have not done as good a job as we should on the personal life of prayer, though we work hard at that. But we are very good at liturgical prayer in worship on a Saturday evening or a Sunday and at other times. So we have lots of liturgical forms that will look and feel like a Roman Catholic prayer form without some of the invocations to saints and things. But we wanted to be initially part of worldwide Catholicism. The break was never intended, but it had to happen. And now we found a good deal of reconciliation these 500 years later. But the prayer life would be as sometimes stereotypically seen in the popular imagination, as personal, hands folded, eyes closed, or it might be about being contemplative in a favorite space. It might be these days, it's one of the rare silver linings during COVID that on Zoom even we're teaching new forms for the individual, not to me, but forms of prayer that can help us feel connected to each other, to God, to all the saints, by way of, again, certain daily forms. Luther himself said, and this is the goal we want to try to achieve, that each morning we should rise up from our bed, make the sign of the cross, remember our baptism, which is a way to say, remember that God claimed us, and so God has our back, and then spend time with Scripture and praying to God, which may mean sometimes just silence, or pouring your heart out in joy or lament. We continually reinforce that and want to develop all the more prayerful consciousness as well as conscience, while we affirm, of course, many forms of prayer in a more communal mode. I kind of went all over the map with that. There's a lot to cover, but I hope that helps. We also see, frankly, the Benedictine order initially saw in Catholicism, that work is a form of prayer, especially if work is understood as service to the neighbor.
Excellent. And I knew you have, at least I read a little bit about your bio. So music is something that's near and dear to your heart. And,
Sure.
I'm wondering if music is another form of prayer.
Absolutely. There's an adage, I don't know if it is actually said. We can attribute lots of false things to our founders. It becomes a mythology, right? But it is said of Martin Luther that he said, he who sings prays twice. So the sung liturgy, particularly in the language of the people, was one of the major innovations of the Reformation back in 1517 and thereafter. And we know, of course, how that meant a revivifying of a worship life all over the world, eventually in one's own language, with local forms. And we're known here in our particular congregation, frankly, without being arrogant about it, I humbly say this, I'm blessed to be here, to be able to be part of it. We have a very classical and I think especially elegant liturgical life here at Christ the King, where worship becomes instructive for much of the rest of our whole denomination and other congregations. So we're known for our organ, particularly because we have deep associations with Germany, with the land of the Reformation. Our organ here is an exact replica of the organ that Johann Sebastian Bach played at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, a famous Lutheran church of a century so after Luther, of course. So we're very keen about that. So music is huge here. And at times we will import a more contemporary modality as well. So Peter Gabriel music showed up in worship this last Sunday. And there we are.
So one of the other questions they've asked me to ask is, what does forgiveness mean in your tradition?
That's an excellent question. And probably I would affirm that forgiveness, its theology and its expression is at root of every religious concern, religious tradition around the world, It says something about how we feel about ourselves. How do we cope in life when something has been inserted into ourselves by nature or nurture? I think it's usually both. That makes us feel at odds with ourselves, alienated from ourselves, and in so being alienated from ourselves, from each other, and from God. Classically speaking, in the Christian tradition, in the main line of Christian tradition, we believe that sin is the phenomenon of being curved in on oneself. Luther used the phrase that he got from St. Augustine, incurvatus se, which means coiled in on oneself. And forgiveness, it then needs to be about taking one's attention off of oneself so to be uncoiled. And there's an irony there, isn't there? That means that the forgiveness has to come from someone other than ourselves. We can only self-forgive after we've received forgiveness in the name of God from an other. So in our tradition, forgiveness means that God breaks through, and we need this regularly through our own defense systems, our own subjectivities, and objectively, externally speaks the word of forgiveness, helping us to speak of what needs to be forgiven, to be sure. So it's about honesty and transparency. And then we live the life of forgiveness for others. In our Lord's Prayer, we say, as Jesus, we believe, taught us to pray, we say, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. The ante is pretty high on that. What does that as mean? Does it mean like? If I'm not very good at forgiving others, then I'm telling God, don't be very good at forgiving me. Yeah. But if it's also a sequence, because I recognize that I can never, in my usual fallen, sinful state of being turned in on myself, if I can never turn myself inside out, God needs to do that regularly with me from the outside. And then I am about exercising that, or as that happens, I'm about exercising that forgiveness for others. I must forgive. It's a discipline. Otherwise, in that case, and I must forgive others. I can't forgive myself, but like God has my back so I can have others' backs, God has my back in forgiveness, so then I can be about forgiveness for others too. It always goes that way, from vertical to lateral.
Yeah, because that is so important for us to, because forgiveness and forgiving others ends up being so much more beneficial to ourselves.
You bet. Yeah. Yeah. It
Because
is.
holding in that hatred, that animosity, that anger.
Right. God's command to forgive others and to love others as a principled command is a gift to us for our own freedom.
And so now I think we are coming up on time. So the last question,
Oh,
which
okay.
I think is one of the most important questions, is what is the most important aspect of your faith to you?
One word I've not used yet through this whole wonderful conversation, but it is a great summary word for it, is grace. If God is coming to me uh, apart from my abilities, recognizing that I can't climb the ladder, I can't, click all the boxes or fill all the check places. God comes to me out of God's will to love and love to will love, and in grace says, I am God's own. It's all grace. At least it's all grace first. And if I don't get grace, that is, if I don't understand it, if I take it as cheap, then I show that I haven't understood it and gotten it at all. I like to use the phrase, so suppose we're in love with somebody and that person tells us, I love you. What if I have to say, what do I say or do now? I clearly haven't gotten it. I didn't understand what just happened, right? I don't go to a book for a how-to. If I've got it, I'm going to respond to such grace with gratitude and with love for the other. I will want to serve the other. You as my new friend, my neighbor who's always been there. Anyone who's watching, anyone I don't know on the other side of the world, to the best of my capacities. Grace starts it, and gratitude carries it forward, and then it's all grace again. If it's not that, boy, we have no hope whatsoever. So that's grace is the biggest word for me.
I can really resonate with that. Really briefly, in conclusion, there's in the Islamic tradition, we have a word that's called ihsan, which means the Prophet explained it as to act as though you can see God watching you.
Oh yeah.
And this that you're doing good, you're doing service as if God is watching you. So everything you're doing is with that out. And in the same way that as kids, when our parents were watching us, we were extra on our best behavior. We were trying to
Yeah.
do those things to impress them. We make it so much so, and we act in that way so often that we become the perfect expression that is about mama's boy. Somebody who does that even when mama's not watching. He's
Yeah.
still acting in a way that would make his
Yeah.
mama proud, right? And
Yeah.
so, that when you're talking about grace, that seems to be an aspect of it, is to internalize that relationship with God, such that you are always exemplifying behavior that would be acceptable to him.
Right. And can I add one thing to that?
Yes,
It
you can.
makes a difference, doesn't it, to take joy in the fact that God is watching you?
Yes.
Because if I do it out of fear, thinking he's going to whoop my butt, then I'm going to find ways where I can get out of the situation.
There you go. So that is a good point too. Yes, because there was always a duality with mama
Yeah,
watching.
that's right. Yeah, every
So,
time my dad would call out in the neighborhood and use my last name, then I was in trouble.
oh, yeah, my parents, it was the full name. Yep. If I
Yeah,
heard more than one name, it was on and popping.
there. Yeah. Well, what a great thing we share. Thank you for that.
No problem at all. So thank you, Reverend Dr. Duane Larson, for spending time with us and teaching us more about your faith, and helping us to understand the meaning of evangelical in the terms of Christ the King Evangelical Lutheran Church. My name is, again, Imam Ahmed Shahid. I am the Assistant Imam of Master Worthy Muhammad and Mercy Community Center, and I am your host for today's weekly Faith 101, where we chat with leaders of different faith backgrounds. This is part of Minaret Foundation's multi-faith programming, and through this, we hope you learn more about your neighbors and learn more about the Minaret Foundation at www.minaretfoundation.com. Thank you, and have a blessed day.
Me, you too. Thanks for this wonderful gift. Bye now.